want to express our gratitude, on behalf of the manufacturers for putting on an event like this. It's incredibly powerful. Look around the room, see a lot of old faces that I know, familiar faces, and new faces I don't. And in this business, success is a lot about relationships. So look forward to continue to build relationships and new ones as we get to meet each other over the next couple days. It's an interesting time in the industry right now, not only from the technology advancements, but we seem to be in a very active time of consolidation and mergers and acquisitions. We're included in that. We can look around the room, there's a bunch of us. Integrators, factories, consultants alike. And obviously that sometimes causes confusion in the marketplace, so encourage you, come stop by. We're 2 years into our merger with Johnson Controls and happy to answer any questions that may still exist about that. Also excited about what's going on in our development process and love to talk to you about more things that we're doing in the cloud services offering for enterprise, in the unified environment, machine learning, some of the technologies we've already started discussing here this morning. So encourage you at the mini roundtables, and on Tuesday when we have some extended time, just stop by and talk to us. So I'm going to introduce the next session here, Impacting the Manufacturer Roadmap. Ought to be a lively discussion about how we as the manufacturers in the factory, how do we come up with the ideas and develop what goes into the future development of our products. So we've got a great panel here. I'll turn it over to the moderator, Brian Coulombe, and let you do the introduction and kickoff.
Good morning. So I was thinking about how I wanted to introduce this session this morning, and as I was thinking about that, Rick, who's one of my panelists, who I'll introduce shortly, sent me a nice article about would you rather be Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, because they both had very different approaches to innovation. One of the things that I pulled out of that article was a quote by Bill Gates, who said that their most important source of information was their unhappy customers. I found that to be pretty interesting. So as manufacturers, my suspicion is that you would like to avoid unhappy customers altogether. And as consultants, I think we can certainly help you with that through venues like this. Our ability as consultants to interact with end users and then deliver you as manufacturers insights on our customers' pain points and how they're reacting to prevailing threats is a great tool for you to impact how you're developing your roadmaps. And then the flip side of that is, if you're willing to share your roadmaps with consultants, we can go to our end users and be heroes by telling them, hey, this is what's coming next quarter, and that's going to solve the problem that you're currently having. So that symbiotic relationship is so important, and I think that events like this help foster that relationship and allow us all to look better to our customers at the end of the day. So before we get started, I just want to introduce my panel. So from right to left, your right, my left, Brian Carle from Salient Systems. Brian's worked with video security technologies for 18 years. As the Director of Product Strategy at Salient, Brian oversees Salient's VMS and NVR product lines and development of new product offerings. Brian is the author of Understanding Video Management Systems, which is available on Amazon. Next down the line, we have Rick Foke from Johnson Controls. Rick is the Director of Product Management, Enterprise Access Control for Johnson Controls. He's responsible for driving the software house in Innometrics Access Product Control product roadmaps, managing the product lifecycle process from inception to end of life. Prior to JCI, Rick was at Andover, working in both the security and building automation industries, and Rick works out of JCI's Westford, Mass. facility. Third down the line is Ben Butchko. Ben is the president of Butchko Inc., a leading provider of comprehensive security risk, program management, and security engineering consulting services. He has designed security programs and systems for wide-ranging industrial environments, including utilities, healthcare, and pharmaceuticals. In 2004, Ben led security engineering and risk assessments for ExxonMobil worldwide. And his project and assessment experience includes on-site efforts on every continent except Antarctica. I'm sure you're going to check that one off the list soon.
It's a tough commute, but.
And last but not least, we have Charles LeBlanc from iMeg Corp. Charles is a licensed professional engineer with more than 30 years of experience in the design and construction of physical security systems. He has worked on a wide range of project types, from renovations and system upgrades to new construction of large facilities and campuses. He's actively involved in client and project development, physical security and system assessments, concept designs, and specializes in the use in the unique requirements of hospitals, campuses, console room operations, and integration of security systems. So we have 2 manufacturers, 2 consultants. So I'd like to start off with the manufacturers, Brian and Rick. So as manufacturers, can you describe how consultants have been able to successfully impact your roadmaps? Is it through project-based requests where there is an ROI, or through in-depth technology discussions at consultant events like this, or through more targeted meetings at consultant offices?
Can everybody hear me? Yeah. All right. So, yeah, great question. Consultants have a considerable influence over our roadmap. Most of my experience working with the product line at Salient is developed through external requests in some fashion or another. So certainly when a project request comes in, if there's a, an ROI tied to a particular feature request, that will get things moving pretty rapidly in a particular direction, depending upon the nature of what's happening at the given time with the product development life cycle and other commitments and so forth. But a lot of feedback comes in, even I suppose without consultants knowing that they're having a direct, input to the feedback loop of the product development process, and that's largely as a result of participation in responding to project specifications. So we get a written concept of what's important for a particular consumer, and as our organization responds to these specifications, if there's a pattern in features that we don't have or features that don't meet a particular specification, we understand the market direction, we understand the importance for a particular vertical market if it applies to a particular vertical. So really, consultants have a large impact on a roadmap, even if it's outside of direct one-on-one communication with our team. But that's also an important part of the process. So, of course, as we get involved in a specific project, we work with the consultants, the end consumer, if there's a feature need for everyone to be successful with that deployment.
Right. Yeah, from our point of view, the same statements are echoed. We feel the consultants are more the longer-term thinkers. If you divide up the industry into consultants, end users, integrators, we look for the consultants for those longer-term trends. The end users are middle-term, integrators are short-term. I'm at this job now, I gotta have it done really quick. The consultants are great to have us look, for the future. We do have a lot of different, types of feedback. I know Clark hosts some consultant seminars, symposiums. We have, a ton of meetings. We are very humble in our listening skills, right? We listen a lot. 2 ears, 1 mouth, that whole thing. And over the years, you can see companies wax and wane over, I want to do it my way or I want to listen. And I think we're in a very good listening period right now.
Great. Yeah. So we'll move down to the consultants. So Ben and Charles, can you describe an instance where you've actually been able to provide feedback that was then incorporated into a manufacturer roadmap? And if you could describe where that interaction occurred, where you communicated those needs to the manufacturer.
Yeah, they always get, they do get entertaining. Most of the time it's, the interaction that's meaningful is when we can go beyond just the folks that are writing up the 8x10 color glossy marketing pamphlet. So where we've felt like we've made the most impact is where we can start the conversation with the manufacturer as, what is it? Describe to us where your product sucks. Where is the wrong fit? And where are you weak? And that's where we can start that discussion, because I don't want to waste my time or theirs if the product that they're bringing to market is one that doesn't fit the problem that we're trying to solve. So because as a consultant, I have one way to be successful, and that is coming up with a solution that gets deployed well. If it can't be installed well and reliably maintained by an integrator, I'm going to look bad. If it's the wrong product and the manufacturer can't deliver, I'm going to look bad. So I'm already, the best I can hit is a 300 average. So in that interaction, if it is a cursory discussion, then one-on-one in our office with one marketing business development person is kind of nice to get an overview, but it takes more depth and a willingness for the manufacturer to share at a program management and an engineering level. And then I've come in on those where we've detailed out the mission, the critical features, and the technology elements that we're aware of that have to come together, and shared that with manufacturers directly. But since that takes a lot of effort on our part, if the first two questions and the first setup of openness and finding out what can be done isn't addressed, then I'm not going to waste my time giving away something for free that doesn't benefit anybody that relates to the folks that are supporting my company directly or indirectly. So it's a step process, and usually it's an initial discussion followed up by an in-person either at their location, or there's more folks involved in a video call or in person to make that happen.
So I've been involved in manufacturer feature set development for many, many years. Matter of fact, I go back a long way with Rick. I actually go back a long way with Salient as well, working with them to develop a lot of things with Para Hansen many, many years ago. The first thing that we as consultants, I think, have to recognize is that not all manufacturers approach that relationship with consultants the same way. Some manufacturers are, this is my product, this is what I'm going to sell, I'm going to sell as many of them as I can, and I'm going to move on. So the first thing we have to do as consultants is to recognize who we're talking to and what their commitment is to working with consultants and end users. And so my first assessment when I actually sit down and start talking to manufacturers is how willing are they to actually consider comments. Then the second thing I do is actually start thinking about what it is that I'm asking. Is it reasonable? Is it beyond something that's really beyond the technology, the capabilities, or expectations that we should have today? And that drives the focus about how you go about the discussion. One of the things that we were talking about kind of in advance of this is the concept of asset tracking that we, as a security industry, spent a ton of money on many years ago that absolutely went nowhere because we were trying to ask a technology to do something that it wasn't capable of doing. And the manufacturer spent a ton of money trying to make this thing happen with absolutely no success. And we have the same kind of thing happen with video analytics. It gets a bad name because people go out and try and sell this product when it doesn't have the capability of doing what we're trying to sell it. So we as consultants have to recognize the same limitations. It's great that our client wants something, it's great that we want something, but there are limitations as to what things can do today. And there are things that we can start putting in the queue for future, but expecting it and demanding it today just because we want it, it doesn't mean it's going to happen. So we have to be very cognizant of that when we start these discussions. So again, between, for example, with Rick and also with in Software House in general and other manufacturers, Salient, everybody else, I have different relationships with each one of them when we start talking about different features, and it's based on their position and where they want to start and what they're trying to do and who you ultimately need to talk to. But just like Ben said with the first questions that you ask, with me the questions actually start much earlier. Who am I talking to? What do they know? What do they not know? Are they really going to be able to help me affect change or get something accomplished? If they can't, it doesn't do me a lot of good to talk to them.
Thank you. Rick, here's a question for you. I mean, working for one of the titans of the industry, so to speak, what's the volume look like of suggestions that you're getting from the security community at large? And is it, laughable in terms of, these requests that you get? And, how do you take that, if it is laughable, how do you sort of prioritize, what you actually, give strong thought to?
Yeah, that's a good question. We do get a lot, believe me. We have a lot of feet in the street, ears everywhere to get feedback. We do have a prioritization method. We kind of categorize things as, smalls, mediums, larges. We try to squeeze in small requests as needed. Larger ones kind of get to the more longer-term planning session. But, it's in the, I don't know, as far as the number, hundreds. Our backlog list is, thousands long of different product enhancements. But one thing you have to worry about, or not worry about, but consider is the time frame. We're a big, company. We have a once-a-year major software release schedule, right? Well, the release for next spring is done already. It's in test. So we're talking the spring after next for the next major opportunity to get features in. So just keep that in mind as far as your expectations. Don't come to us with a huge feature and say, hey, we have to add that in 2 months, because it's just not going to happen. Just kind of gauge the time frame of things, and we can work together on that.
Brian, similar question for you. I mean, how do you guys vet those requests that are coming in and prioritize and strategize how you're integrating those into your roadmaps?
Yeah, good question. I think the process is probably similar for most manufacturers. So we take in pretty much any request that we get from the field, and it goes onto our roadmap. Now the difference between going on our roadmap and actually making it a feature is scheduling it to be part of a feature, and that's going to be based upon the opportunity need and the time frame to be successful with that particular request. Features that exist on the roadmap oftentimes get shuffled around and fall into a theme. So if there's a particular feature that we're working on that's a larger, more high priority feature set, there may be other features that have existed on the roadmap for some time that fit the same theme. By the same theme, I mean they fall in the same component of the software, or the code that has to be written is similar in scope for 2 particular features. So we might be working on a reporting and management capability to automatically send out snapshots of cameras in different locations so you can judge camera quality. Well, there may also be some other reporting feature that was previously assumed to be lower priority or longer term, but now that we have developers working in the reporting code, we'll take all those other reporting features and group them together, because there's a certain amount of startup time for somebody to become familiarized with a set of code and to get their mind around that, and you optimize your development time by grouping features together. So that's largely how that works, but oftentimes we look for a particular opportunity, market need, and then we build a set of features around that.
Follow-up question for both of you. What does your feedback loop look like back to consultants who are providing these recommendations? I mean, is it something that you routinely communicate back out, the status of those recommendations, or if you tell them, hey, this just isn't going to happen for 3 or 4 years, if at all, does that feedback get communicated back out?
I think we can do a better job of that, to be honest. I think it's more ad hoc. Okay, we do very good internal messaging and keeping track of things, but sometimes the word doesn't get out to everyone that should know. And there's been a few cases where we left people hanging, like they thought it was coming and it's not. It's like, sorry, it was on the lower part of the list there. So, that's something we're going to work on.
Ben, thoughts?
And from our perspective, I can look across the room with the number of manufacturers, and we gauge ourselves which manufacturers are going to give us the straight scoop feedback and which ones we can count on as to if they say it's coming, or a very close manifestation, versus it's on our dream sheet and we promise it and it's supposed to be here in 4 months when it gets here in 3.5 years. So there's a consistency, and while I think we understand there are changes in the marketplace and changes in business pressures, it's in dealing with manufacturers that give you a consistent view of indicating their business process integrity. If they consistently hit the targets they tell you are coming to, whether or not they make you happy, I'm much more inclined to work with them, because I know that even if I may not like the answer, I'm going to get an answer that I can count on and I can plan for with the folks that we're trying to support in achieving their mission. And hardly any of the folks we work with, their mission is any of the stuff that's being sold or designed by the groups in this room. It's all a support function.
And I'll add to that too, is that there's one other element to this, and just like Dr. Singh had said earlier about the deduction, one of the things that we have to do is deduce a lot of things as we're making decisions. For example, what I've found over the years is that I may talk to somebody and a manufacturer may talk to me about what a feature might be and when it might be coming, but understanding the background of the software that we're trying to work with, the platforms, whatever the pieces, whether it's hardware, software, or whatever, the experience that you get over time begins to help you deduce how reliable that and accurate that statement might be about schedule especially. So for example, when we ask for certain things that may be database centric, well, different manufacturers have different things in the way that they do databases, and a lot of times it's not as easy to deploy some things. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of things that happen in the background with software that we as consultants probably know very little about, and frankly, we have other things to focus on besides things like software development. But understanding those basic concepts and the logistics associated with trying to deploy a feature sometimes, it's important to understand that when we go into it, because then you have a realistic expectation about what can be done and when it can be deployed. That's one of the things that I spend a lot of time with manufacturers talking about. Is not just what's the feature, it's okay, what's the practical way to deploy this, and can we actually do this in a reasonable amount of time? Because there's usually a lot of times there's windows of opportunity to actually issue and send out a new feature set. And that window of time has to be associated with other elements within the software. And the software can't do some basic fundamental elements. Those have to be developed before you actually can support the feature you're trying to get to. And I know talking, for instance, we spent some time talking with Mercury over the years, and okay, well, you have a bunch of manufacturers that rely on Mercury hardware. Well, if I'm relying on Mercury hardware, and Mercury hardware needs to have something fundamentally in their code in order for me to support a feature set, I have to wait for that to be developed. I can't go and expect something to just materialize from a manufacturer relying on a piece of hardware when it doesn't exist from their end. So understanding that is a big issue for us, as well as the business case. It's up to us as consultants to ultimately sell a feature. It's one thing to be able to say, I need this. It's another thing to say, here's a realistic expectation about how many you're going to be able to sell of it, what's the value it's going to bring to your product line, and how successful you're going to be with it. What was it worth even investing the time into it? So I think those are critical pieces for us as consultants to be considering when we talk to those manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Right. Yeah, the one thing is it a one-off feature or is it a market, broad-based feature? That really makes a lot of difference to us.
Or how to turn it into a marketable feature, right? It may be a one-off, but how can we turn this into a broad feature set?
Mm-hmm. Right. Rick, here's a question kind of targeted at you. Security industry, certainly we've seen a lot of merger and acquisition activity over the years, and you've kind of been at the forefront of that. To what extent have these mergers and acquisitions affected your product roadmap? And have you had situations where you've had something beautifully laid out and everything just gets completely disrupted by an acquisition?
Gee, that does happen now and then, doesn't it? Even way back in the Simplex iSecure days, going back a few years now. But yeah, most recently with the Johnson Controls merger, acquisition, whatever. It has affected us a little bit. They had a system, the P2000. We're now, we spend some resources incorporating that into our roadmap. So things happen, okay? But in general, it's been a very supportive acquisition for us. We've basically been left alone as far as the overall roadmap. But yeah, there's some little bumps and process differences that happen, but so far so good. Just one of those things of life. You have to just be aware and try to, to do the best you can with the available resources and work with the new players. But again, in general, it's been, so far so good on our end.
Good. Brian, for you. So at Salient, how do you determine what information on your roadmap you're actually willing to publish? Certainly there's got to be a discussion about, well, hey, this is going to be something really new and exciting and we don't want to clue our competitors in, but at the same time we want, to have consultants be able to start specifying these things and getting our end users excited about it. How do you guys make that determination in-house?
Yeah, thank you. So for us, roadmap information has never been particularly secretive as a result of concerns about, competition getting their hands on it. In some cases, every situation is unique, but the bigger concern about releasing roadmap information is, I think, a lot of themes that we're hovering around here in our discussion is setting expectations appropriately. The longer term a project is, the greater the risk is that we're not going to hit our originally targeted time frame. If we go and tell the world, hey, XYZ is coming out in September, it may actually come out in December, it may come out the following January. So there's a risk of setting the appropriate expectations. And also, the further out a project is, the more likely some other effort, opportunity will come along and interrupt it. So typically we release roadmap information. We don't require an NDA, but we'll do it based upon the audience need to know, I suppose, and as it gets closer to fruition. So right now Salient's working on a pretty significant software development effort, and we're getting very close to the release of that. And it was interesting to see the progress of how open we are about it. And in fact, in the last the GSX show, it was the primary technology displayed in our booth. So as we get closer to the release, we'll be more forthright with the information, the timing, and so forth. But really, the risk is setting expectations with our consumers.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we use the term committed roadmap versus uncommitted. So if it's on the committed roadmap, slide deck or whatever, then that is definite. It's a scheduled thing. So our release in the spring is committed. We'll show all you what you want to see about it. For the next release, the year afterwards, that's not officially committed yet. So that's, it falls in that, it could be here, could not. We're still not sure of the actual feature sets in that release yet. So we do make a point to, make sure it's the committed roadmap that we're showing you versus uncommitted.
Do you guys find that having NDAs in place with consultants is actually a meaningful tool, or is it just something that, it's kind of hard to track that down after the fact? It just, kind of sets a level set that, we're not going to share the information, but, it's not necessarily critical as a tool.
I find NDAs, no, they're not really a meaningful tool. If a consultant goes and tells somebody else about our feature, we're probably not going to find out about it. We're certainly not going to sue them because that will probably mean a loss in business. So, it's just a feel-good. It's just a feel-good tool.
Right. I fully agree.
Yeah. Well, Ben, you had some thoughts.
Having been asked to sign NDAs with several manufacturers to get a peek under the tent. What I've found and had instances several times is it's sloppiness on the manufacturer side that says everything we've presented to you is subject to NDA. And we've gotten some good information out of there, and it's things that apply to projects that are moving forward. And I've had one case where it took 3 months to get a response back from the manufacturer to say, with what you told me, what am I allowed to tell my client regarded to that content that they have been asking for, and it may open up a sale for you, but based on what you told me to sign, and coming out of the nuclear weapons world where we were somewhat sensitive to some of those things, we strive very hard to work to that. And we actually use that when we can have, one manufacturer tells us one thing, and as Charles mentions, that you have one that says, well, we can do all of these things and they're wonderful, and it's going to make it's going to bring money and parties and happiness to everybody that you deal with, when we know from another manufacturer that core function that they're looking to is either technically not there, or you have two companies that absolutely hate each other and you have to integrate the two. So it's a business decision that is why those two will never happen. So I think the NDAs, we use them in our partnerships on with different clients, but it's one thing to say sign an NDA. It's another one to have an NDA program that says what you can share, when and how, and what are the exception reasons. Because we have NDAs with our clients as well. And so we're having to negotiate and connect the dots between 2 or 3 sometimes NDAs that are overlapping. And the lawyers are never involved with that discussion. It's just, here's the ticket to get in the room. So I think if we look at that, we need to look further than just, I'll sign this if I write confidential on the bottom of the page.
Charles, have you had a similar experience?
Yeah, I think NDAs are really a lot more complicated than they need to be, because really what it boils down to is a trust between the manufacturer and the consultant. If a manufacturer comes and talks to me and they trust that I'm not going to say anything, is there really a need for an NDA? At that point, it's some attorney saying, get an NDA and cover our butts. And again, just like Brian said, what are you going to do if I disclose something? And if you trust me, the reality is that you wouldn't be talking to me at all if you didn't trust me in the first place. If you didn't trust me, why would you want to talk to me? So it's up to me as a consultant to make sure that the manufacturers trust to talk to me and that I'm not going to divulge anything more than is necessary. And so it kind of goes to what Ben is saying is that, look, when I'm talking to a client, I have to have the leeway to be able to discuss what I need to about a particular feature or a particular function. Sometimes that may mean that there's a little bit of potential of going toward the NDA piece of it, but in most cases, it's really not. It's about saying, okay, look, there's some things in the work from various manufacturers. Here's kind of where the industry's headed. And that's typically how I phrase things, is that I see the industry trend being this. You can expect this within this certain amount of time. Don't expect it for at least this amount of time, or good luck ever getting it. And that's really what it boils down to. And so the end result is that when I'm talking to a client, I base their expectations on what I expect, having heard what I've heard, not necessarily a specific comment from them or any particular technology revelation or roadmap revelation. It's about conceptually what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go and how it matches up with the rest of the industry and how it matches up with their capabilities and what they've been able to do in the past. I've got manufacturers that'll tell me it'll be in this next release, and I'll trust them. There's manufacturers that'll tell me it'll be in this next release, and I figure it's about 5 years away. That's just the way it works sometimes, or it may never happen at all. That's exactly the way that we look at it as consultants typically, and I think most of the people in this room would agree with that particular statement. They've been bitten in the past by taking the manufacturer at their word, only to find out later that they couldn't meet whatever they had promised to do.
Especially when it's the local sales guys and sales reps, right, that don't always have, full picture of what's going on, but they want to make the sale, right?
And that's a huge mistake, right? So again, who's in front of me? Is it a sales guy, or is it somebody who can actually affect change? One of the things that I found is that the accuracy of the information, especially when you're having roadmap discussions, if a salesperson is giving you a roadmap discussion, first of all, there's very little information in it, because the last thing you want to do is give a salesman stuff that they're going to try and sell it. So they typically, if you're talking to a salesman, then the roadmap is going to be very, very limited in what there's actually there. It's going to be, this is what we know we've got, and it's already done, and it's ready to hit the street, and it's going to be issued. It's in beta testing at the latest at this point. It's probably already been released and fully tested. If you're talking to somebody on the technology side, and that happens a lot when we go to symposiums of various kinds, we're talking about where they're planning to go and what they're planning to do. Usually that roadmap is a lot more ambiguous. It doesn't have any timelines to it. It says, here's where we're trying to go with things, and here's how we're developing it. And that's how you start learning things about what the core structure of the code is and how complicated it is for them to be actually able to deploy a particular feature. Because then you start saying, oh yeah, I can see you have to do this, this, and this first, even though it's not part of the published expectation feature. It's something that has to be done in the background in order to make that feature work.
And those roadmap discussions, when it gets into the longer term, I just love to have those two-way discussions. I hate to just lecture, here's what we're thinking, because that doesn't do any of us any good. The best time to do it is when you have a smaller group, you get engaged, and you just flesh things out. That's what makes the job worth doing.
And these are great opportunities for that very thing, because a lot of times your sidebar conversations are exactly that. A manufacturer might say, hey, you know what, I'm thinking about doing this. And as a consultant, you say, well, what about if you added this little piece or that little piece or did it a little differently? Then all of a sudden it becomes something that's not just a one-off feature, it's something that you can deploy. And even like a discussion from last night, we were talking about how we could take an existing product and use it in a completely different way to do something that we need to solve a problem for, but we cannot ultimately use it's not designed for that right now, but could there be some minor changes to an existing product to make it actually solve another problem for us? And that simplifies the manufacturer side. They can bring it out to market a lot faster, and it's something that really ultimately solves a problem. That's what we're getting paid to do as consultants, is to solve problems. And if we're not solving those problems, including working with manufacturers to help create the solutions for those problems, then we're not being successful as consultants.
Brian and Rick, to what extent are your local sales guys important to this process, and to what extent are you empowering them to have those roadmap discussions with consultants and end users? And I guess a follow-up to that would be, have you gotten burned by, your sales guys coming back and saying, by the way, I sold this, but we have to include this in the next feature set?
That's definitely happened several times, yeah. Hostage. Yeah. So in our organization, salespeople are critical to that feedback process, because oftentimes they're the direct interface to the consultant community for us. Other than events like this, people in our product group are not all over the country all the time having these discussions as frequently. So our salespeople will often collect that feedback. Oftentimes, from their perspective, it's associated with a project. It's very high priority. They'll pass that on to us. Relating to an earlier conversation on this panel, oftentimes the feedback is incomplete. One of the key pieces of information is not just, what is the feature that is desired and what is the opportunity, but what is the time frame necessary for us to implement that feature, right? Because it may be practical, it may be impractical. So usually the salesperson comes to us with, some basic set of information and initiates the process, at which point becomes a discussion. And, we have to go out and solicit, what are the details of how this is going to be implemented and how do we make it successful for that implementation. Very importantly, what is the time frame for us to be successful? And then we may go back and have internal discussions and come back to the, consultant involved in the discussion and say, well, we can't meet XYZ time frame, but we can do ABC. Is that going to be, acceptable? Or in order to meet XYZ time frame, there's a modification that we propose. So, those are the salesperson is critical to the process. They begin the discussion, but oftentimes there's a discussion that evolves from that initial point of contact.
So Ben and Charles, do you have any relationships with manufacturers where there's routine cadence for them coming in and interacting with you and discussing roadmap features and presenting to you? And where are those discussions happening? Are they happening in your office? Are they happening in trade shows? Or is it really events like this, which are more targeted discussions with obviously the decision makers?
For us, I think the more regular interaction with manufacturers are the ones that we have ongoing projects with, and that interaction, a lot of it happens informally. For example, we had an issue that came up last week, and I knew exactly from having gone through either their annual event or events of this such, having, as Charles mentioned, there's the general discussions, and then there's the side discussions, and I try and leverage specifically coming to an event like this and then setting up in advance side discussions on particular details. A regular cadence coming to my office is we might as well just go have lunch, and then if there's an issue, we'll talk about it. But it's more, when can we reach out? And so when I have the example, like on Thursday, an issue came up, I knew exactly who to contact. I reached out with here's the issue, here's the details, and within 24 hours, I had a very solid response that I could share with our client on what is the roadmap from here to address that problem. We didn't have all the answers, but there was a quick response which made sure that the manufacturer was looking much better than on the surface what it looked like, as well as that we looked better by being able to find the right people and get to that solution. So the general events, whether it be the ISC West or the major elements or the more targeted for the engineering consultants, that is to establish the contacts that we can touch when we need them, as opposed to, I don't need to see this in Axis, for example. They finally, one of the guys there he stopped calling me because I said, when I need you, I know who to go to up to the chairman of the board on down to find the issue, and I know what your roles are. So as long as I'll keep you in the loop when I'm talking to these folks so you can support when we're on a sales piece, and I have a much stronger relationship with that person rather than feeling like, one, they're bugging me and that I'm always just trying to push them off like a date that I never wanted to go out with.
It's more of an as-needed basis.
And for us, it's all about relationships. So to directly answer the question, or part of the question, for instance, conventions, trade shows are the absolute worst place to have these discussions. First of all, you're talking in a very tense environment. People are being pulled in a lot of directions. Nobody can really focus on anything. So a trade show is an absolute worst place to have those kinds of discussions. So for me, the discussions wind up being a variation of things. My availability is really tough, as any consultant is. In my office, I have a number of different consultants, and so they all have different issues and different considerations, and so the concept of somebody coming in on a scheduled basis is not really practical for us because people are always on the road and doing things. But I think the relationship I have with most of the manufacturers that I actually speak to most regularly, they know that I'll call them when I have an issue. They know that I'll call them when I want to discuss something. They will occasionally call me and follow up and do some things. And then when we get a chance to meet at events such as this is really great for me. I have a lot of sidebar conversations, and a lot of them are really not about specific features. They're about specific goals. Where's the industry going? What are we trying to do? How can we ultimately evolve product to be able to solve bigger picture problems? I know, Ed and Lorna, you'll recognize, there's all these different things that we've talked about in all these symposiums over the years about, how do we make security more palatable? How do we get people to do things? And I specifically mentioned those two because we wind up ganging up on people when we're at these conferences more than not, as well as Ben and I, we've done that a couple of times too. But the bigger pictures the bigger problems we're trying to solve are ones that aren't going to get solved overnight. They're not going to get solved in one conversation because we have to be able to change the way people are thinking and approaching things. The concept I was talking, we went and visited with ASA yesterday, and we're talking about the door paradigm and the different solutions on doors and the costs associated with them. Well, you know what? It wasn't that long ago where the only way we could do security on a door was either a lock and a key, which was pretty much no security, or go through this extremely expensive security access control system that we want to put on the door. And that just doesn't work because our clients all have solutions that run the gamut. And I used an example when I was talking to these guys earlier about, we used to have manufacturers come to us a lot and say, okay, well, what is a reasonable cost per door for security? And what is that different for a high-end client versus a lower-end client or a middle level client? And the reality is all of our clients have the same series of problems. They have very high-level security solution issues. They have very low-level security solution issues. So if I look at things from a cost per door perspective, I completely lost track of what the actual problem we're trying to solve is. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to get people to start thinking about the problems a little differently. And you don't do that by sitting there and saying, I need this feature, I need that feature. It's, look, these are the problems we're trying to solve. How can you help us solve it? And how can we understand each other mutually to the point where we can actually discuss this intelligently and work on a solution? And that's what it really boils down to. And so it's a lot bigger picture than just a specific feature. I find myself not having feature discussions as much as I used to, and really focused on, okay, what do we want to do as an industry? Where do we want to go? Do we want to control 3% of the doors out there, or do we want to control 95% of the doors out there? And if we're going to control anywhere in between that, then we need to make sure that we have solutions to accommodate that and make it practical for people. And it's the same with cameras. It's, we talk about that on the camera side. We talk about that with intercoms and telephones and everything else. So all of the pieces and parts that we use are all to solve problems. And sometimes manufacturers don't know the problems. They see a very small snippet and maybe the tip of the iceberg of what the actual problem might be. It's up to us to explain that to them and help them, because we have a lot more exposure from the end user struggle side. And it's up to us to convey that to manufacturers.
Thanks, Charles. So last question, because we're running low on time here. This is for Brian and Rick. I mean, I think Ben and Charles just did a great job kind of describing their ideal world for how they interact with you. From your standpoint, what's your ideal world for how to interact with us? And how can we ensure that that our feedback is getting up to folks like yourselves, who are the decision makers in the company?
Right.
Do you want to take it?
Yeah, basically just keep the communication lines open through multiple channels here, like these type of shows, symposiums. Just keep the lines open. Through the salespeople, through other types of interactions with. Just anybody in the company. Get us involved in projects up front, take us out to job sites. Again, we're all ears. We really want to, rationalize the different features, different high-level use cases into our products. And we'll make it a point to just get more of the feedback loop, to close the loop on things. I think it's a multifaceted approach. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Feedback from the consultant community is so important, because you folks are, kind of on the forefront of what's happening out there and working with a variety of consumers. And it's really a service to manufacturers when you do provide your feedback. And I find the most effective way for me to receive feedback is as directly as possible. So, I would believe that goes for most manufacturers. So if you can establish a relationship with, in particular, the product or the engineering resources at a manufacturer organization that you do a lot of business with, and it's worth your time to provide that feedback to them, that's going to be the most effective. Otherwise, sometimes the feedback process gets communicated through maybe a integrator or a regional salesperson, and then through another person begins to get to be the game telephone, right? And it gets diluted, and not all the details get conveyed. So by the time it gets up to somebody like me, there's no backstory as to why this is so important. The nuances are missing, and it's watered down. So the direct communication is most effective, when it's available.
Great. Thank you, guys. Do we have time for a question or two, or okay, that's it. All right. Thank you to my panel for the great insights.